Competing in the Asian Champions League is supposed to be a reward for a successful domestic campaign, but instead it's often been considered a burden by Australian clubs. Until now, hopefully. The AFC have announced a significantly increased money pot with the intent of further incentivising participation on Asia's premium stage, which should, at the absolute least, ensure profitability for A-League clubs, which, believe it or not, is saying something. The draw for the Australia Cup round of 32 has been made, and there's a couple of cracking matchups to look out for. The latest on Canberra, Australian siding at Manchester United, and the Copa America joins the list of international football to pay attention to on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me tonight, we kept the A-Leagues of our own tag around just for a little bit longer to help people adjust Poletti, but we're going to ditch it Monday next week. We're saying goodbye to the foundation kind of piece of our existence here.
Yeah, it feels weird that it's almost like the New Zealand Knights, the foundation club disappearing. Like we thought the Jets were going to go. We are the Round Ball Australia podcast now, and that's the way it's going to see. Podcasting, but not as you know.
At least we're not Gold Coast United and we're not extinct, so that's a positive start, isn't it?
Hey, Gold Coast United still exist, mate. They're playing up NPL over in Queensland.
I should have used North Queensland Furious, the other example.
That would have been a better example.
Yeah.
Well, hang on. So I already said podcasting, but not as we know it. What about 60 minutes, 60 emotions?
Well, Christian Montegan, you've beaten the intro here, but hello to you as well. We've both got, keen attention on the Euros tonight, both Italy and England playing. You feeling confident?
Yeah, obviously, big game coming up tomorrow morning, Italy-Spain, but also rematch for the semi-final, England and Denmark. So that'll be a cracker as well to sort of delve into and dissect. So yeah, it should be a good morning of football.
Absolutely.
Not a rematch.
Okay, Poletti. You don't get to talk about European football. Remember, we set those rules. All right. We will touch on the Euros and the Copa America at the end of the show. That's going to be the pattern over the next few months, next few weeks during this tournament. We're going to get all the Australian stuff out first, of course, celebrate Australian football, and then we'll do that international stuff. So let's start with the AFC. They have announced their prize purses for the 2024-25 revamped club competitions. And the big headline here is that the Central Coast Mariners will receive, at minimum, an extra 1.2 million Australian dollars for simply qualifying for the league stage of the Asian Champions League Elite. Now, this is great news. We knew that the AFC were bumping up the top-end prizes for the winners and the runners-up of all the different competitions, but we hadn't heard about the lower-down distribution. So these were very, very crucial numbers because, as I said in the intro, Australian teams particularly, unless the Adelaide United and Western Sydney go all the way to the final, and the Central Coast Mariners and the AFC Cup, it should be said, often lose money on these tournaments. So this needs to be confirmed by the PFA and the clubs, but at least that amount of money, 1.2 million, should at least cover profitability, which is a very key figure. So that, that's just prize money for winning the A-League Premiership as well. You got to think about it that way. So great bonus for them. It's then an extra 300,000 if they make the round of 16, which, as opposed to our current format where we've been putting 8 teams into 20, this is 8 teams from 12 in the league phase. So the odds are even better, and then it goes up and up from there. And the winner gets something like 20 million Australian dollars, around about that number by the time you add it all up. So Poletti, this is great. It means we're further incentivising Australian clubs to compete hard in Asia, particularly the Asian Champions League Elite, and we'll get onto the other competitions in a second. But it's really setting that bar now of, it's putting the carrot on the stick for what Australian clubs can go out there and achieve.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think the fact that, it's that bigger prize money to start with just for qualifying, as you already touched on, might help incentivize fans to come out to these midweek fixtures, because for whatever reason, Asian competitions have never really taken off in Australia from an attendance perspective. Like, even when some of the big Asian clubs came out, when Sydney FC were in the Champions League for that sort of 2-3 year period in a row, like even when they got, the likes of Hulk and Oscar and, all these big names come out that, people would pay $150 and not even blink at it if they were still signed to their Premier League clubs. So watching an end of season friendly, they're watching proper competitive football in the middle of the season, and don't want to come out on a Wednesday night and watch it when conditions are perfect for football. It hasn't quite made sense. But I think the fact that it's like if clubs, and it's not to say the clubs haven't taken this competition seriously before, but this extra prize money, if the fans think that, okay, well, if we all come out and we can help make it a proper home ground advantage, that might help. Because you see when the A-League sides, they travel to China and Japan and Korea, the fans pack the stadiums out. It's not quite, as full as it would be for, say, a derby fixture or just even a regular league fixture in these countries. But, like, they get the crowds there are dwarfing what would turn up in Australia for these fixtures. So if you can balance it, I think home ground advantage will play a huge part in it. I think that if you can get fans to these fixtures, because it might help give the competition more prestige and resonate more with the Australian public. Absolutely fantastic to see, and it's just for winning the league season.
And on that very point, I think this is going to have an interesting byproduct. In Australia, obviously we have the Premier's Plate and then the final series that goes into the championship. And Christian, a lot of traditional football people will, put more value on that Premier's, Plate, first past the post, that method. And, by winning that trophy now, you get qualification into the Asian Champions League Elite. Currently, Australia only has one direct spot. So that's it. That's your way to get there. It's probably going to have the effect of elevating that trophy as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen some arguments to say, the champion should be determined based on where you come during the regular season, based off the rest of the world. And that's Asia as well. I mean, you look at countries like Japan and South Korea, they don't really have a final series, a grand final to determine the champion. It's just the regular season like in Europe. So, I mean, down the line, it's something to consider because that's going to become more of a priority to come first place, as the money in the prize pool increases, as we've just seen recently. That's going to provide massive incentive for some of these Australian clubs to take it really seriously, to just make top 2 first place and not just scrape into the top 4 or the top 6. So
just to rewind a little bit on this, the Professional Footballers Association of Australia released a report in conjunction with FIFPro in February outlining the strain that Asian football was placing on Australian clubs. It's supposed to be a reward. Instead, it was just being a hindrance, almost always losing money, the extra travel and fatigue, affecting domestic form, which is where the players do actually earn their money. I've been back in touch with the PFA since this news has come out. They haven't been given the full regulations by the AFC yet, so there's potential for other things like the travel subsidy to change, which is broken in its current state. There's just a flat fee regardless of how far or how long you have to travel. So, we talked about last year with the Central Coast Mariners flying to Oman for the final. That, gave them the same subsidy as driving down the road to Macarthur for that zonal final. So that system potentially could change as well. But what they did say is that this decision regarding the distributions was made completely unilaterally by the AFC. And that's been a frustration of a lot of player bodies in Asia, that the AFC just simply aren't willing to collaborate on these issues. And the overarching goal of that report, Poletti, was to fix the changes of the Champions League, but mainly they were just calling out for more dialogue between them and the AFC so they can work on these things together. Unfortunately, it seems like that hasn't eventuated as of yet.
Look, I think that it's a step in the right direction, right? Like that, there's at least this willingness to do better by the clubs that are ultimately the ones that are making AFC all the money through these competitions, whereas before it's just been and we've seen this with Australian clubs before, where it's just been you do what we tell you and we'll punish you if you don't. And we saw that over COVID, where Australian clubs strongly had to consider the idea of doing their Champions League commitments in the hub, despite the fact that it clashed with the A-League's final series that year, because the ramifications from the AFC, and we've seen that with how it's hurt the rankings of the Australian sides on the points system, where we no longer have 2 spots in the elite competition, in part because Australian clubs just didn't compete during the 2021 or 2022 Champions League, somewhere around COVID. because it was in a hub
21.
that conflicted with the final series because obviously all the competitions had to be delayed, put back, and what have you. So it's nice to see that things are taking a step in the right direction, even if it's a little bit later than what I think clubs and the PFA would have liked.
So just to round out the other competitions as well, the AFC Champions League 2, which Sydney FC have qualified for, the minimum prize for getting that group stage, which Sydney FC have done, 450,000 Australian dollars. And then the Women's Champions League as well, Melbourne City will pocket 150,000. And given the centralised format, the expenses, I'd argue, are probably less. So I'm not sure how those numbers work out, but it would be close to probably covering that as well. So yes, prizes have gone up, but still more to come. So it's encouraging signs for now, but we get to look forward to, Central Coast Mariners playing against some of the elite and probably some homecomings as well. Yokohama F Marinos, Harry Kuehl, and Kevin Muscat's Shanghai Port team are both in the league stage in the East, so we could potentially be seeing them back on Australian soil, which is exciting.
So I think perhaps one thing to note is that from the round of 16 onwards, it's an open draw. It's no longer segregated between the West and the East once it
Incorrect. Incorrect. So,
or is that the quarters?
The round of 16 is still East-West split, and it's a home and away two-legged tie. And then when we get to the final 8, that's when we get to that centralised tournament, which is the open draw.
Okay, so potentially one thing that could have both a positive and a negative impact on the Australian sides is because it's the open draw, you've got to come up against some of these big clubs from the Middle East, the Saudi Arabian clubs, the clubs from the UAE, they're big, powerful clubs. We've seen the spending power that they have. Neymar, Ronaldo, the stars of yesteryear ad nauseum, who still are ridiculously talented, that could potentially run all over Australian sides. So it's got its positives in the sense that, hey, it's great, but it's also got its negatives.
Yes, you're right. And, I think it should be an aim for the Mariners and any Australian side to get to that final 8. As we said, you get into the league phase, which is 12 teams from the East. 8 of those then go into the round of 16. So you should expect that most years the Australian clubs will be getting through that, and then it's just 1-2-legged tie away from that final centralised phase. So it's a very unique tournament. Asia has always been known for its interesting structures, as we've learnt with the AFC Cup this year. But yes, exciting for Asian competition next year. In terms of some domestic cup competitions, Christian, the Australia Cup draw for the round of 32 was on Wednesday night, and it gave us a few fun fixtures. There was only one, I believe, exclusively A-League matchup. So we got plenty of cross-pollination between the member-fed teams and the A-League, which is great to see. And by far the most exciting matchup on that list has to be Oakley versus Sydney FC, right? A rematch of a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I was actually at that game a couple of years ago. Oakley ended up winning that 2-1. Yeah, it was a good atmosphere. I think from memory it was over 2,000 attendance, which wasn't too bad. It's only capacity of about 4,000 at that stadium. But yeah, it should definitely be a great atmosphere again. For some of these NPL non-A-League clubs, I think now is a great opportunity, to sort of get a scalp or two against, these bigger A-League clubs because, we see Sydney, for example, they're in a bit of a transition phase at the moment under Tale, a few players moving in and out. And just always the start of the season, it's always going to be a bit rough. You've seen upsets before A-League clubs get eliminated by some of these NPL clubs, which is sort of no surprise given the NPL is obviously, stuck into their season, probably about halfway through or just thereabouts. So they're right into it. Whereas, the A-League sort of coming off their off season, by the time these games roll around. So, Oakley, Sydney, definitely one to watch out for. Sydney, we're wanting their revenge, but wouldn't put it past Oakley, to be honest, at home to grab another upset, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think by the time these games come around, they're going to be in the back probably third, Poletti, of their regular season, so really hitting their strides. And for that reason, as you mentioned, Christian, the one I'm going to bring up is Lambton Jaffers versus Melbourne Victory. The Jaffers sitting top of Northern New South Wales NPL at the moment. Victory still without a manager, extremely early in pre-season. We're sitting here now, it's about a month and 10 days around to the start of the round of 32. So depending on how long it takes Victory to get their affairs in order, get a manager in, sign some players, it's going to be, very quick turnaround till that matchup against the Jaffers in the round of 32. So I think that one's earmarked for a potential cup set. Poletti, what do you got your eye on?
So the two fixtures that really took my eye, Rockdale Illingdon versus the winner of the Newcastle Jets and Western United in the Australia Cup playoffs. July 23 or July 24. The two
Both.
fixtures are taking place that day. I just don't remember which one is which. I think the fact that Rockdale Illingdon are dominating NPL men's New South Edition. I know exactly where you're going. At the time of recording, last night took on NST boundside Marconi Stadiums and got absolutely walloped 9-0 at Marconi Stadium.
Crazy.
I thought that the 6-goal thriller I called was going to have the most goals in a match that night, but no, clearly I was wrong. So yeah, I think that, but still, regardless, Rockdale Illingdon far and away have been one of the best sides in the NPL New South Wales men's competition this year. And so I'm keen to see what they can do against A-League competition. And I think they're in with a legitimate chance of advancing to the round of 16. At the very least, because I'm certain that the match would be taking place at the Rockdale Illingdon Sports Centre. More Chavapi at the Australia Cup. Let's go. And then the other fixture I've got my eye on is NWS Spirit versus the Glenorchy Knights. For me, this one is very selfishly just coming from the fact that I absolutely love watching NWS Spirit play. Their coach, David Perkovic, love his tactics, his style, the way he sets his sides up. For me, it's just a very enjoyable watch. And I'm not much on the tactics, but I'm certainly no Jacob Stevens when it comes to tactics. But it just becomes an enjoyable watch. And depending on what they're allowed to nominate as their home venue, because I know that when they were in the national stages a couple of years ago, they weren't allowed to nominate the Arctic Circle as their home ground. So I'm very hopeful they'll be allowed to do that this time around, and the Australia Cup national stages gets introduced to the coldest place in the country. If you've been there on a Saturday night, you know.
I will say it's now been a week since Jacob's been on the podcast. He has been a bit ill. He made some kind of comment about being on a really long streak of consecutive appearances and then has been on his deathbed for the last few days. But now he's got 2 independent mentions from both Poletti and Will about his tactical prowess. So I hope that brings him back to life a little bit, perks him up a bit, and hopefully he can rejoin us soon because he's getting plenty of praise. Christian, is there any other matchups you want to highlight before we move on?
Probably the other main one is South Melbourne against the Phoenix. Obviously the Knicks coming off arguably their best season ever, under Giancarlo Italiano. Just inches away from making that grand final, putting victory to extra time and heartbreakingly losing, that one just to Economidis header. But South Melbourne, one of those sides, obviously a lot of history behind them, but they haven't really sort of performed in this competition as of late. So I'd like to see them make a deep run, given, their proud heritage should be, if they can make a quarters or semis. We saw the atmosphere they brought their game against Preston Lions a few weeks ago, and that was impressive, and that was a crazy atmosphere. So, this game's being played at Lakeside, so, the atmosphere and the fans, the colour is going to be extraordinary, you'd hope, against an A-League club. So, really looking forward to that one and, seeing what they can do, because South Melbourne are having a terrific season so far. So I think they can match them for sure.
This blows me away every time we get to this conversation, every year. But the fact that Wellington Phoenix are playing in a competition where they are not allowed to play a home game is just extraordinarily funny. Whenever it doesn't matter how they get drawn. Doesn't matter how they get drawn.
Can you imagine with and I correct me if I'm wrong. I'm 99% sure Football Australia offers travel subsidies to clubs that have to travel.
I can't say for sure, but that sounds right, yeah.
Can you imagine an NPL side from Western Australia having to travel all the way to New Zealand? Clubs don't have that budget.
Well, that's the thing, right? If FA are paying for it, then it doesn't matter. But just, obviously, there's concessions because they're a New Zealand team in the A-League, Asia, Oceania. We've gone through this all before, but just a funny point that, they just can't play a home game. Anyway, it's just funny. It's
Let's rebrand the AFC. We're going to do AFC West and AFC East. Absorb Oceania. It's going to be the Asian Oceania Football Confederation, and the Oceania is going to be part of the East, along with Australia and East Asia, and the West will stay the same as it is already.
Yeah, well,
the
you're not the
easiest
first
solution to all of
person
this.
to call for that. I don't think that's going to
No,
happen
but I'm
anytime
definitely the
soon.
latest, so that
Definitely the
counts for
latest
something.
in the last few seconds, absolutely. Well, William has asked, what's going on with the Canberra men's expansion? What does this mean for the league's future growth, and will a 13-team competition be unlucky for some? Now, we did talk about this a couple of weeks ago. The Canberra expansion for 24-25 is off. That is not happening. We will have a 13-team competition next year. But the expansion is still going ahead at this time, just pushed back 12 months. The APL is still committed to that expansion and is still in talks with their preferred consortium to take over, who we know have been steady throughout this entire process. But things have just got in their way that has meant that they couldn't get the team up in time. In terms of the future growth of the league, this is an interesting question because we know that the initial plans when this was all announced by the APL is that they wanted a Canberra and an Auckland expansion. Of course, they've got 1.5 of those, and then 2 more teams as well by 25-26. Now, that idea to have a 16-team competition in just 12 months is completely fanciful for me. We know those plans for the extra 2 teams have been shelved for now. I'd be amazed if they came back to light anytime soon, to be honest with you. And for me, Christian, to be honest, I think you have to question the motivations of what this expansion plan were to begin with. We know now, we have a much clearer idea of the financial state that the APL were in when they made this plan. They needed quick cash flow. That's a fact. It was part of the reasoning behind the grand final decision. I'm sure it was part of the consideration as to the expansion plan as well. We know that the license fees can be quite hefty. The asking price was 25 million. We don't believe either Auckland or Canberra will pay that full 25, but not far away, somewhere around the 18 to 20 million mark, I think are the rumours going around. So, the fact that potentially all this was done just for a little bit of short cash flow is not ideal, and probably the long-term success of the league needs a little bit more patience.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of honesty and transparency that's sort of got into fans a bit, I think, with this recent news. And we've seen it, in the past couple of seasons with the grand final decision. Just be up in front about it. Just say, it's about the money. This is what we need to do. Not just sort of, beat around the bush and get clubs into the league, when it's not really feasible. There needs to be a clear structure and plan put in place. And, we mentioned it before on the pod a couple of weeks ago, and we spoke about the expansion clubs. I mean, an extra season isn't that bad. Just to settle it down. I think it would have been a disaster, to be honest, if we got a new team in, if we got the Canberra men's in for next season, because we've seen in recent history that the APL and Football Australia, once the FFA were in charge, a few years back, they're just not, I guess, I wouldn't say responsible enough, but there wasn't the adequate planning in place to make sure that they're successful as possible. And we've seen the collapses in the past of some clubs. So the fact that we've got an extra season is a positive, I think. But yeah, just be upfront and honest with the fans, just to say, what you're really feeling, what's the process behind these decisions, just a bit more detail, just to, inform the public of what's actually going on. I think that's the most frustrating part of it all.
I do find it extremely surprising, Poletti, that for all the APL and the A-Leagues take from America and the MLS, they are clearly the gold standard of dealing with expansion in a licensed league. MLS, baseball, football, basketball, all this kind of stuff, right? They have plenty of years of headway. They allow them to build their own assets. I know the financial climate is slightly different, but the teams are all sorted, years in advance. There's trading of rosters. We saw Riley McGree get signed for Charlotte and not even play, get sold a year later. Like they do that so well, but we just seem to be trying to rush things a lot in Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like as you said, the blueprint is there. I think the big difference is that there's so many different power breakers when it comes to Australian football, where everyone's got their own agenda, everyone's got their own piece of the pie that they want to protect, and it's just hard to get everyone on the same page. Like, it's not like, the MLS had the greatest of starts, or just top-flight professional football in America to begin with. We've seen leagues come and go. We've seen different things sprout up here and there. And then, the MLS has finally made its headway with what it's doing, to the point where I think the last expansion fee I saw was somewhere in the $900 million range, which seems absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that the APL are, only asking for 25 million. I know that the climates are different, but just that difference in the size of those two numbers is completely insane. And yeah, it seems like the A-League, I should say the APL might not even be able to get, that $25 million number, because they went out with this idea of announcing, these are where our next two cities are going to be. Now let's go find people to bid for those things. And it's like, well, if you put in the cart before the horse, it's almost like we've kind of played our hand, and you're not getting the best value out of it, because we've shown our hand. We're not getting the best value out of it because everyone knows what our plan is, and they can start to lowball us in terms of where these teams go. Now, it's a lot different, say, for example, if you've got Bill Foley wanting to come in, who's like, yep, I want part of the A-League. I see the value moving forward into the future, but I want to put a fourth team in Melbourne, as an example, and the APL is going to turn around and go, well, no, this is what we have an idea of, but you've expressed an interest in wanting to come in, and then you negotiate a price from there, because it might be, what if I were to give you $40 million for a fourth team in Melbourne? Well, how about we give you $25 million for a team in Auckland? And you play and you negotiate around that. So this whole thing just seems incredibly strange, the way it's played out. Obviously, because it's a privately run business, we're not going to find out what the numbers are in their entirety. I'm sure that everything will leak at some point, because everything seems to leak in Australian football eventually. But, yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
It is weird. And, Christian, there was an article from AAP, George Clark, today, saying that Football Australia has been sounded out to take on a greater role in running the A-Leagues. Multiple sources claiming to tell AAP that clubs are concerned with the direction of the competitions under the APL. I find that sentence inherently contradictory, given that, we're led to believe that the clubs are the APL. The article says there is unlikely to be an appetite to hand total control back to FA, but believe a collaborative approach with the governing body can help shore up the future of the A-Leagues. I guess just to take a couple of positives in these last few minutes of conversation is people are still willing to invest in the A-League. We've seen Bill Foley come in and hit the ground running with Auckland. We'll talk about them a little bit later as well. But the Canberra, expansion looks like it will happen eventually, even if not when we first thought. And that we've heard from both sides of the FA-APL split in terms of Stephen Conroy and James Johnson that, relationships between the organisations are on the mend as well. And there is a willingness to collaborate in that way for the betterment of Australian football.
Yeah, there's definitely, a couple of bright sparks to look forward to. Just going back on that original point, to go back to, the FA sort of running the A-League, it's like, in two minds, as in, we sort of moved past that and now we're going back to it. It's like, what do we really want out of it? And again, that goes back to the planning and, if something hasn't worked, it's like we're going back to the same old thing. So we just need to, ensure we've got a long-term project in place. And, in terms of like the financial state of the game, I think it is in a good place, like we've touched on before. Some of the transfer fees that we're seeing from some of these young players, Paulson, for example, these owners, willing to invest, in clubs such as Bill Foley, with the new Auckland expansion. There are positive signs. It's just the problem is everyone isn't on the same page. And that's a slight concern out of it all for me. I'm not too sure about you guys.
I wouldn't quite describe the financial state as good. I'd say there are reasons for optimism.
There's positive signs to look for. I'm not saying it's in a great state. Obviously, they've explained that it's not in the best state. But I'm saying looking forward, there are positive glimpses to hold on for, if you want to look at it from that perspective.
I would agree, yes. And, Jacob and I talked a couple of weeks ago on our State of the A-Leagues pod that got a great reception, by the way. Thank you to everyone who listened to that. But, the context of COVID does get forgotten a lot in this whole financial situation. The APL spent a tremendous amount of money, at least according to the Australian, supporting teams like Wellington and Perth, and obviously we know the Jets ownership and all that. Just getting those teams to play, hosting Wellington in New South Wales, dealing with border stuff, propping up Perth Glory. The teams that are still in the league wouldn't be in the league if that money kind of wasn't spent. 35 million on keep up, unmitigated disaster. I completely understand that, but in terms of where that Silver Lake money went. We asked the question on the podcast a couple of weeks ago: would the league still exist in its current phase if that money wasn't spent? So obviously things are looking down at the moment, but Christian, I agree with you. There are definitely optimistic signs looking forward. And then Poletti, just to touch on the other side of the coin in Canberra as well, we saw more news about the women's team today. There were reports that the consortium looking to get the license for both the men and the women's team, they would absorb together. They offered to take on management of the women's team when Capital Football were going through this funding crisis. And it seems like Capital Football stalled a little bit, at least that's the report. And then, talks for that broke down.
This idea of the consortium offering to come in that we know is going to be taking charge eventually of both the men's and the women's sides in Canberra. This essentially gives them a chance to get their feet wet, get things underway, relearn what goes into the running of a club. Depending on who the owners are, I don't know who this consortium is, but essentially gives them a chance to hit the ground running, learn what's working, what's not working, and then the men's side to go. And I know we had the discussion on Monday night around coaches and the idea of viewing women's football as a stepping stone and how that's a bad thing. And when I say we had a discussion, I mean I had a rant. But this whole idea, it probably wouldn't be the worst thing in this particular situation that they come in, they see what's happening within the A-Leagues itself, they get the idea behind running the club, and then when the men's side come in, they can take everything they've learned and put it into practice. And we're going to see the reverse of what's happened, or what is happening in this situation with Auckland next season and the season after, where the men's side's coming in, and then the women's side's coming in a year later, where you can essentially flip the principles of what I've just said. And everything can run a lot smoother. But for Capital Football to, stall on a deal when I don't want to put words in Capital Football's mouth. All the indication coming out of the end of last season was that they couldn't afford to continue running Canberra United, and then the money was raised, and it's like, yep, we can keep them going for another year. The ACT government advanced some money on one of the sponsorship deals to keep the side running. And since then, they've had players leave left, right and centre. We don't know what's happening with some of the players that seem keen to stay, like a Michelle Heyman. The coaching situation's still up in the air. Everything just seems like Capital Football just don't want anything to do with this. And so when you've got a consortium offering to come in and take it, that is going to have the club in 12 months' time anyway, and stall on talks to, see this deal go through and then ultimately drop out, something's not adding up here. It's 2 + 2 and you're getting 5. Something's off here, but I can't quite put my finger on exactly what that is.
Yeah, it is a little bit odd. And part of that report as well is that Michelle Heyman, if she was to remain at Canberra, would be sitting on a marquee contract, which is exciting news. And, she's had a little bit of interest from other A-League women's teams. I have no idea who they may be, but Melbourne City looks like a perfect fit just on the face of it. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens there. And they're still looking for a coach as well. And you've mentioned before the fact that they are run by a state body. There are some extra processes in place to ensure that's done correctly. Let's go to a little bit of transfer news, shall we? And Christian, Manchester United have signed 16-year-old James Overy on a scholarship deal. It's a pretty cool thing to say, just, out and out that Australian is signing with Man United. He played for Perth Glory against West Ham in the friendly last year, was said to have impressed in that game per the Manchester Evening News, and has now signed a deal at Manchester United to join their academy, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, that's an incredible experience for the kid. I mean, I haven't seen too much when he played, to be honest, but, to get that move at such an early age, the learning curves and the experiences he'll gain out of that, overseas at such a massive club, Obviously we're not talking about him, making a breakthrough into the first team in a few years' time. I mean, way too early for that. But to be in the academy setup, the coaching over there is obviously top class, and yeah, for him that's going to be extraordinary for him just to learn his craft and hopefully develop as another promising young Australian prospect.
Absolutely. And in other young Australian kids arriving over in Europe, Aaron Kunda has made his arrival to Bayern Munich training facility up in Germany, went through some medicals, said hello to all the fans on social media. So he's set in there now. We know he had to delay his travel plans a little bit as well when he got caught up for the Socceroos. Hopefully that wasn't too much of an inconvenience for him, but he has made it to Germany now. Now, Poletti, two big, imposing centre-backs leaving their A-League clubs as well during the week. Marcelo from the Western Sydney Wanderers and Damien De Silva from the Melbourne Victory. They're two giants of the league. I mean, Marcelo, the captain, absolute, rock at the back, gets up with the head as well. Damien De Silva, incredible stat, won 2 victory medals in just a season and a half at the club, which is beyond impressive. Scored that magical double as well against Western United this year to earn the victory, a win during the regular season. But they're two big departures.
Yeah, it's certainly shaking up the defensive lines at those two clubs. I mean, Damien De Silva, you talked about his, accolades and accomplishments, during the 18 months he's spent at Victory. A key reason why they made the grand final on the, with their back-end work, definitely helped get them out of some sticky situations. I know that, we all made fun of, the Melbourne Drawery for, the amount of draws that they nabbed throughout the season. But, some of those draws probably turn into losses without, De Silva at the back. And Marcelo at the Wanderers, slightly controversial when he signed, given the departure from his French club and the reported circumstances around said departure. Was given the captain's armband immediately by Rudan, if memory serves me correctly. 2-year deal. He's left. I mean, he definitely started off with a bang at his club at the Wanderers and sort of seemed to taper off at different points throughout this last season. So, still, definitely going to be a huge loss. I mean, losing the captain is never easy, but I don't think the Wanderers will have too much trouble finding someone of a similar caliber to Marcelo to take the reins at the back next year.
It really did feel like he was much beloved by the supporters as well, the way he went about playing his football. Now, FTBL are reporting that De Silva is on his way to Ligue 2 back in France with Clermont, which is also the destination said to be for Moussa Touré, and that news is ratified by Channel 7 Adelaide as well. Another Touré brother, Christian, off international to go play in France. This deal was first reported by Robbie Cornthwaite, I think, back in January or February. Of course, they were in League 1, Clermont. They have since been relegated, so League 2, slightly lower standard, but another European move for Adelaide United player.
Yeah, what's with the French clubs signing the Australian players, these youngsters, it's quite extraordinary. Imagine if Clermont were still in League 1 and they're signing, Melbourne Victory's starting centre-back. That'd be a storyline, wouldn't it? but
I hate to say, but the scenario might have been slightly different for De Silva if they did manage to stay up in League 1.
Play along with it, Lockie, but
okay, I'm sorry to kill the fun.
Yeah, League 2, I mean, for De Silva, like that's still obviously a big move to play back in France. Obviously, there's still some incentive there. He's still got a good season or two left in the tank for him to do something over there. And then, Touré, to get that experience again, over there overseas in France is, going to be very interesting for him to see how he settles in early, how he adapts. Will he go out on loan next season? That's all, obviously still to be determined. So, still early days, but obviously these are the kind of moves that we want to see our youngsters, get to sign these contracts and move to bigger and better things.
Absolutely. Auckland FC have signed a few more local Kiwis. Still no big marquee signings in terms of internationals or any well-known A-League players just yet, but they continue to build their squad focused around their local talent, which I think is a great move from them to start with at the very least. A little bit of a confusing one for me, at least, coming out of Wellington. Pennington off to Perth Glory. I thought he was a very good player for them at times. Poletti, I'll go to you. You're the one wearing the Phoenix kit. But Pennington, such a good player for that Wellington outfit. I would have thought maybe he got a better offer from Perth, who knows? But to be a part of that Wellington Phoenix going into another season under Italiano, I thought that would have been incredibly attractive.
I should know that the only reason I'm wearing this Wellington Phoenix kit is because it's pride and nothing more, nothing less. Look, for me, I think it could just be a case of a better offer. He's not the first Wellington Phoenix player that we've seen gone from the Knicks to the Glory in recent seasons.
Under very different circumstances, though.
Yes, but he's still not the first to make the move. Look, I can imagine something of a better offer. Maybe he's been told, who the coach is going to be next season and really wants to play under whatever coach it is, whether it's Alan Stagich or whether it's someone else.
That's not Glory, a leading statement at all.
if Glory decide to move on from their current coach, we don't know the circumstances behind the situation, but whatever it is, I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure it's a good reason, and someone like Nicholas Pennington is probably exactly what the Glory need. Given the way that their season sort of tapered off towards the end. Yep. And then in dub news, Princess Abini has re-signed with Sydney FC as well. It'll take her into her 10th year with the club. Wore the captain's armband last year with Nat Tobin's ACL injury. Wasn't the best of seasons for Abini, but I'm sure she'll have an absolutely bounce-back season. And in doing so, she will take over the club record for appearances on the women's side of things, set by Teresa Polias, with just 6 appearances next season. So definitely exciting times as well. Did we talk about Millie Farrow signing on Monday's episode? I don't remember.
I think we did.
And in case you missed it, Millie Farrow as well has made the move from Perth Glory to Sydney FC. I don't know if it's going to be a direct replacement for Courtney Vine, depending.
You'd think they'd play her centrally.
Yeah, I mean, Ante's also not necessarily used a striker in his formations. It's more of a floating striker, false 9. But even then, it's just been a very fluid front line where everyone can go everywhere. Maybe Ante is angling for a change. But regardless, I'm very excited to see Millie Farrow. We talked last season that, all she needed was a couple of goals to sort of get underway with the Glory. And then she had that breakout game against Melbourne City and then sort of dropped off the face of the earth on the goal-scoring front a little bit, but then so did the Glory as a whole. So I'm very excited to see what Millie Farrow can do at Sydney FC.
Yeah, look, you brought up the idea of Ante Juric angling for a change. I don't know, there was some other news this week that I think might spur up some ears. Of course, Joe Montemuro. We don't know the situation of Tony Gustafsson after the Olympics. Montemuro has been a free agent for a little while now. We know now that he has signed on to be the coach of Olympic Lyon, which is an incredibly successful side in the women's game, won the Champions League on many occasions. So potentially Ante Juric's stocks has just rised for a national team job as well. I don't know, I'll just throw that out there as we would depart.
I've had this discussion with others before, and look, I don't doubt that Ante could do a good job. I think the discussion very much comes similarly to what the discussion has been around Montemuro, who I was assured was going to the Matildas, mind you. I was told this was a done deal. I've been told that, he's going to lead the Matildas into the future. And it turns out you need a little bit more than just being Australian to get a job. Who'd have thought? I think that Juric could do it. It's just a case of whether his style will translate to international football. And that's always a big question to ask. I don't necessarily think that the Matildas are in a position where they can take a flyer on a coach in the hope that it will work out. Maybe Ante takes a job with one of the junior national teams to kind of get him better set up, see how his style might fit international football. But by all accounts, he's incredibly happy at Sydney FC. I don't think he's keen to make a move anytime soon.
That's the thing, right? He's obviously stayed at Sydney FC for so long because he feels so comfortable there and loves that project. I just think whatever his chances of being the national team coach would have been, I think they're slightly increased now that Montemuro has been taken off the table.
Yeah, look, I think that, like I said, there's definitely a chance there. I'd like to see Mel Andrietta get a chance. She's been around the setup for an incredibly long time, She works incredibly closely with Tony Gustafsson, so she knows exactly what he's been trying to embed in the last few years and could seamlessly carry on that project if it works. Maybe even do it slightly better or slightly differently, depending on which approach you want to take. And I'm talking primarily from a substitutes perspective, balancing the minutes around a little bit more, which has been a criticism of Tony throughout his tenure. And then I know this isn't on the run sheet. We weren't planning on talking about this, but I also want to throw a name a little bit out of left field. I wouldn't say no to Rado Vidicic. He did incredibly.
But that's really out of left field.
I've had this discussion previously with someone as well. He did such a good job in the A-League Women's with what was essentially the Matildas light in the Melbourne City women's side. He's been around national team setups in the past. He's worked with Football Australia inside the national team programs. He knows his football knowledge is incredible. I don't think he'd be the worst option. Now, it could just be a case of he doesn't want the job, and I'm auditioning him for a role that he has no interest or desire in taking. I wonder where I've heard people auditioning people that don't want roles before. But anyway, so
we're not understand these references are so vague. We don't know where you're going, please.
I'll explain later. Look, there's plenty of options depending on what happens with Tony Gustafsson post the Olympics, and who knows? Tony could get a medal at the Olympics, and he could re-up with the federation, and the last 5 minutes have all been for naught.
Perhaps. Very, very likely indeed. Thank you, Poletti. We're going to do a little bit of Euros now. Are you going to hang around? Or
you don't? Well, actually, based on our group chat, I might need to stick around and referee this.
Okay, you're just going to moderate. Plenty of jokes have been made about my English allegiances, comparisons to Christians, Italians, and everyone thought that it would be perhaps a little bit dangerous to leave us alone in the call together for 10 minutes. But let's just catch up on the last few days of action. And Christian, the big storyline, as you've outlined here in our rundown, Belgium and Croatia both, have held on to this kind of golden generation tag for the last, probably like 15 years or so. They've been labelled as such. But potentially we're witnessing the death of them both.
Yeah, I mean, Croatia to start off with, they've played 2 games so far against Spain. Defensively, they looked absolute shadow themselves, especially first half, conceding those 3 goals. And then against Albania, it was just a bit of frantic football, I guess, for that full 90 minutes. Obviously, Albania get another early goal. Albania's credit, they were so good on the counter-attack. Croatia just left holes in behind, left, right and centre. They just couldn't cope with it. And then you just look at their golden generation. It's just aging. You got Modric, 39 years of age. You can tell he's lost more than a step. He just looks really slow on the ball. Some of the passes he made lost a lot of possession, which is, obviously unlike Modric, even though he's still playing at Real Madrid and, producing these good performances. But if you've got lesser quality and talent coming through in a side like Croatia, you're going to get found out, which is, what we've seen so far. And then for Belgium's case, I'd say a bit of a case of, being unlucky. Lukaku had 2 goals ruled out for offside. You don't see that every day.
Before you move on from that, my mind was completely blown. Like, obviously the first one's offside. You get that. The semi-automated offside stuff is kind of new, but we understand what's happening there. But the second one that was ruled out for handball, I felt like I was at the cricket and there was a DRS review and they got Snicko out and you're trying to see the edge of the fingers over the ball and you got the sound waves and the spike and like, Eddie, there's a spike there, reverse your decision. Like, it was so strange.
Like, what has the game come to, honestly, that we've got Snicko in a game? It was literally, like you said, we're watching a game of test match cricket, like between Australia and England. It's Belgium and Slovakia. Like, it's just absolutely crazy. And the funny thing was, you didn't even need that technology to use it. You could see it was a clear handball. It's come off his hand. It's moved direction. Like, you don't need it. But
And from my understanding of the rule as well, right, because it was an assist, it doesn't matter about intent. Just the fact that it was hand assist to goal means it's no goal, full stop.
Yeah, I haven't sort of revised on the rules as of late, but from my understanding, if it touches the hand, in between, if the goal's been scored, then it has to be ruled off no matter what, intentional or unintentional. So from that standpoint, obviously they've got that spot on. But yeah, like I said, a bit of unlucky fortune for Belgium, but again, their golden generation is well and truly past. The likes of Eden Hazard, obviously not there anymore. yeah, it's just very difficult for them to see them, making a deep run in this tournament. Not just because they lost to Slovakia, obviously they can still come back and, rectify their result. It's still early days, but from early signs, they've got Trossard, he's had a good season at Arsenal, but besides that, they just lack depth, and that's, going to be a big worry heading into the latter stages.
Germany as well, Christian, they have now qualified for the round of 16 in the win over Hungary. It wasn't quite the same margin, of course, as the Scotland game, but it was still a very nice performance. You've highlighted here Jamal Musiala and Wirtz as well. Just two young kids, just having the time of their lives on the biggest stage possible. It's great to watch.
Musiala, that kid, just incredibly talented. The way he just maneuvers, out of these tight spaces, his quick footwork, just really exciting talent to watch. Even Wirtz in this game, he came off, I think, 10 to 15 minutes into the second half. So, I mean, to have that luxury to rest those star players, heading into the third game of the group stage in the knockout rounds, obviously qualified now, that has to serve as an advantage, surely. Hungary obviously served as a bigger threat than Scotland in this game. A couple of big chances, Neuer made some good saves. But this is Germany's first clean sheet since Euro 2016, the round of 16 against Slovakia. So, it's been a while since they've kept the ball out of the back of the net. So, again, they're making strides, growing into the tournament, host nation, taking the pressure off them in some sense, even though obviously now the German crowd's going to think, okay, we can go on and win it now after these two results. But they've just got to take it day by day. And it's still an open tournament because no one has really stamped their authority. Besides Spain, you can say they've played one game, but besides that,
Spain looks scary.
It's pretty open.
It's incredible, Poletti, because Christian has such an intelligent European football brain. You'd think I wouldn't have opened up a 250-point lead in the fantasy competition, but I'm looking at the leaderboard right now. This is what we got.
I'm not here to give an opinion. No, that's too far, Lockie. That's too far. Ease it back a couple of notches.
Yellow card. Hand out the yellow card, Poletti. Yellow card.
I'll give you a yellow card for telling me what to do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay,
yellow cards all round. Both getting yellow cards.
It's only the captain.
You're both the captain. So actually, no, neither of you are the captain. I'm the captain now. You're not allowed to talk to the. You're not allowed to talk to the referee. So yellow card for you. Yellow card for you. Go away.
Does that make me Tom Hanks? I'll take that. But yes, we do have a little fantasy competition going, and Christian is sitting in dead last and fifth of the five of us that are competing. So you've got a little bit of catching up to do. Maybe, perhaps, you'll get a little bit closer tonight. Of course, you will all be listening to this after these games take place, but we're sitting here on Thursday night to do this recording. Denmark, England, Italy, Spain. Obviously, I'm paying keen attention to Denmark, England. Hopefully the three Lions get up there. Christian, you reckon the Italians are going to concede in the first 30 seconds again?
Very funny joke, Lockie. Yes,
it's probably likely. You're playing Spain.
Spain don't score goals. What are you talking about? They dominate possession for 70% of the game, and then they don't score.
Didn't you listen to our last podcast, Poletti? For literally, this is a real stat. I know you won't believe it, but it is real. The last 136 games, dating back to like 2006 or something, they've won the possession count.
Final Euros.
2008, and then in their first game, they lost the possession count, but won 3-0.
Yeah, so they dominate possession and then they don't do anything with it. That's
no, but they won possession they lost possession in this game and then they won 3-0. They've turned a corner.
No, so what I'm saying is that they will dominate possession and then they won't be able to do anything with it.
You're saying it's going to go back to the same old rhetoric.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying is that they're going to get 62% of the ball and they're not going to be able to do anything with it.
I reckon Giancarlo Italiano would do well against the Spanish.
He probably would.
I mean, it's going to be an interesting dynamic though, because reports in Italy saying that they're going to stick with the 4-3-3, perhaps make a couple of changes. Perhaps Mancini gets put in there to sort of unsettle Morata, sort of tagging him there for the whole 90. But even a 3-5-2, just overflood the midfield, try and wrestle possession, because we saw the last Euro Spain completely dominated Italy. To be fair, they should have actually won. Italy pretty fortunate to win on penalties. So, I mean, the positive for Spain is that they can play in different ways now. They don't have to rely on as much possession. It's meaningless possession, really. In the past, they've sort of been accustomed to tiki-taka, boring football. It hasn't really gotten anywhere. Poletti mentioned as well. Poletti, our Euros expert, mentioned that they struggle to score goals. So, So it's going to be fascinating to see who comes out on top, because a win obviously guarantees them qualification for the round of 16.
I'm sorry, Christian, but I have to highlight the fact that the tiki-taka brand of football that was made famous by the Barcelona team of the early 2000s with Messi and Ronaldinho and Neymar, and you've just called it boring football. I can't believe the words I'm hearing out of your mouth.
From late, it's been boring. There was a game where there was almost 1,000 passes, but they don't do anything with it. That football was completely different with the talent they've got.
That is true.
Yeah.
The latest Spanish teams, yes, you are right, but I had to highlight it. Of course, and then tomorrow as well, we're getting some extra international football into our rotation. The Copa America is getting underway. Messi's Argentina kicking it off at, I believe it's 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. There are a couple of days as we move towards the end of the second match day of the Euros and the first match day of the Copa America, where these games line up so nicely. You got the 2 a.m., you got the 5 a.m. into the Copa America, 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. You could go all night and just watch football for literally 12 hours straight, Christian. It's a dream, isn't it? If only it was a good time zone for us.
Well, we've sort of suffered with the AFC Cup recently, haven't we? Having to get up early for those Australian supporters, having to watch early times. But no, you're right. The 12 hours straight, watching back to back games, it's going to be phenomenal. Copa America, obviously, it hasn't got as much attention as the Euros. I think Australians are more, inclined to watch the Euros and have got more of a European background following. But the Copa America is still a prestigious tournament. Likes of Argentina and Brazil, obviously going to be the main two favourites coming in, but USA hosting it in their own backyard. Can they make some noise and make a deep run? They've obviously got their own sort of golden generation with themselves, hosting the next World Cup in 2026. So they want to hopefully, put a stamp, to proceedings and hopefully, raise a few eyebrows.
Absolutely. Well, as we say, the Copa America games are at a much more friendly time zone early in the morning for Australia. So if you do want a little bit more, we are running some previews up on roundballaustralia.com.au as well. So check up there. We're going to go group by group, just like we did for the Euros, to give you a little bit of knowledge about the Copa America competition. Of course, as Christian mentioned, this one hosted not in South America, but in the US of A with a couple of the North American teams. So they're stealing the dream that was, ripped from our Australian arms during COVID when we received that invitation to the Copa America, but we were unfortunately denied. So it'd be interesting to see how that tournament plays out as well. Of course,
I was so close to booking my flights for that, and then I just the rumblings of this COVID thing started to hit, and I'm just like, I might wait a couple of days before I start booking flights and everything like that. And thankfully I did, because otherwise I probably would still be in a fight with some sort of airline to try to get my money back.
Absolutely, one of your better decisions, Poletti.
I don't have many of them, but when I do, they count.
They count. They pay off.
One last thing for us to touch on: Socceroos have moved up to 23rd spot in the FIFA men's rankings.
Have they? We're back up.
Yeah, so they're sitting the fourth best side in the AFC behind South Korea by 0.06 points.
Yep.
Iran in 20th spot and Japan in 17. So Australia jumping back up a little bit. We knew going into the final match day of the last round of World Cup qualifiers that they needed South Korea to draw or lose, but they ended up winning their match. But it's still achievement. They're still moving up the rankings, and hopefully top 20 isn't too far away for our men's national side.
Yes, and the draw for the next stage of World Cup qualification is only a week away as well, so we will find out our opponents for that third round soon. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Christian Montegan, thank you. Good luck to the Azuri tonight.
Yes, hopefully not a goal conceded after 23 seconds, but we hope otherwise.
And Poletti, have a lovely sleep.
Would you take 24 seconds, Christian?
No, I'd take a clean sheet, thank you very much.
Yes, and look, he was referring to the fact that as part of the Euros, I am on Team Sleep. Let's go.
All right. Well, if you are up in the morning for the Euros or the Copa America, we salute you. We understand your pain. Of course, it's all part of being a global football fan in Australia, but it's what we do, isn't it? Thank you all very much for listening. We appreciate all your support. We will be back on Tuesday for more Australian football chat. Thank you all very much for listening. Goodbye.